Hi everyone, my name's Lily and I'm the book reviewer behind Utopia State of Mind, and today I'm going to be chatting with you more in depth about how to make the Babel Scarf. So I made a video a little bit ago, and I will link that down below, where I talked about making the Babel Scarf, but I didn't have anything really concrete, any information to give anyone. And so while this isn't a vlog, like a really aesthetic kind of like, oh, watch me make the Babel Scarf, cue the footage, this is like the nitty gritty stuff about it, because I made a second one for my friend Elle. I'll leave all of Elle's social media links down below. This one had a little bit of changes to it, and so if I were to make a third one, where I'd end up is probably somewhere in between prototype 1 and prototype 2. Let's just get into kind of the nitty gritty details about how you could start the scarf. And then at the end, I'll kind of tell you about, after the scarf, what I would offer as tips. So I know that I'm personally guilty of doing this when I watch crafting videos, where I'll just kind of watch from the beginning and I'll follow along. I would recommend you at least watch this once to figure out at the end kind of the things that I would modify. I think will be just too difficult to start with that. So nitty gritty. The Babel Scarf is knit 30 stitches wide with 4mm thick yarn. The construction of the scarf, basically, I mentioned in the other video, but it's 2 panels. So a panel that says Babel, and then the other panel, which are stripes, mostly because the intarsia knitting for the actual lettering for Babel is going to have a lot of really ugly ends on it. I wanted to hide that by doing a second panel, and I did not also want to do another panel of intarsia, so I basically just did stripes. This is a really nice way, though, to give a little bit of variety as well. I would recommend you using a gauge swatch for this. So for me, I was using 4mm needles, and I was doing 30 stitches across. The gauge swatch was roughly what I was expecting, but I would do a gauge swatch either way, so you kind of get the feeling of how wide you want the scarf to be. That'll be most of what we're going to talk about in terms of what would be helpful for a gauge swatch, which is the width of the scarf. So for reference, this scarf, when it has been seamed, mine is about 13 centimeters or 5 inches across. So the scarf approximately is about 145 centimeters tall, give or take, mostly because it's a little bit difficult to measure the actual tassel length, just because different strings kind of vary, but that's approximately how big it is. It is definitely made to measure in a variety of different ways, and I'll talk about it when I talk about the actual construction of the scarf, where you could augment it a little bit, but in general, it is a little bit more made to measure than other things. You just have to make sure, obviously, when you finish the first panel, you do it for the second panel. So I would recommend taking notes if you're going to do this scarf, just so you make sure everything works out mathematically. I underestimated, when I started knitting and crocheting, how much math there would be. And I'm glad no one told me, honestly, beforehand, because I probably would never have started. I'm going to also leave links in the description box for the charts. So for reference, the charts for the silver tower on it, I will just show it to you, the silver tower. And I could also, I guess, leave charts for the Babel here. In general, it's just kind of using text, using a very basic kind of standard Times New Roman text. You can obviously change the text if you want to experiment with different charts, but I can leave links to all of that down below. In terms of skill level that I would recommend, it is basic skills in terms of cast on, stockinette stitch are the other stitches. The only thing will be the intarsia. I feel like that kind of makes it more of an intermediate project. I'm not really great with intarsia, which is why maybe that's my own kind of insecurities talking about intarsia, but in general, I feel like this is a beginner to intermediate-ish, somewhere in the middle kind of level for the scarf, just because of intarsia. And also it's knit front panel, back panel, so it's not knit in the round. Those are the basic details for it. In terms of the yarns that I just used an acrylic 4mm yarn. I used about, let's see, how much did I use about? I used about, I would say, 200, I'm looking at the math and I'm realizing that the math, doesn't really necessarily work out the way I wanted it to be. I was using about anywhere from 200 to 200. I used about 250 grams of the black. I used about 10 grams of the silver glitter, and I used about 41 grams of silver. Obviously, when you change around the gauge, when you change around the kind of made to measure requirements and measurements, then it can be a little bit different. So I tried to include grams, although it's not really helpful in that sense. Let's go on to the back, or to more. So the basic construction of the scarf, we're just going to talk you through the first panel. So the basic construction is that at the very, very bottom of the scarf, I did about 3 to 4 centimeters. And this is roughly about one height of my gauge swatch. So basically about 4 centimeters, or about a 1 by 1 kind of inch is normally the gauge swatch you'll be doing. So I did about a section at the bottom. This is about 12 rows at the bottom. And then I did the actual tower, which took about 29 rows, with a little bit of a caveat coming up later. Then basically what I did is 2 skinny stripes. These were about 6 rows each. They measured about 2 centimeters, or 3/4 of an inch. And then I did a large swatch of black before I go into the actual letters. For the large swatch of black, I did about 30 rows of black, just to give it some distance before it actually starts with the Babel. For the actual BABEL, that kind of rows are in the charts. And I did about roughly a 5 or 6 row gap in between, depending on the odds and evens. So basically, I only started intarsia on the right side of my work, meaning that if it was an odd number, then I would have to only do 5, or an even number, then 6. And then I did the same thing on the other side of the scarf. Where is it? On this side of the scarf. So it's the same thing, just mirrored that way. And then for the other side, this is where you can kind of play around a little bit. So for the other side, I wanted to keep the same thing at the bottom, this black spot, then the tower, and then I did the 6 row stripe, 6 row black stripe. And then I go right now into really big equidistant stripes until basically what it is mirrored on the other side. So for that, I just counted all of the amount of rows that I had left, and I divided them into an odd number, because basically you've started off with a black row, and so you'll do gray. It has to be an odd number, so you end off with another gray row to go into the black row for the pattern. However, I will say that in the first prototype of the scarf, I actually mirrored this same pattern from panel 1 onto the back, which I did not. And panel 2, I stopped about here on panel 1. So for example, if you wanted to do that and have more of a symmetrical look for the bottom half, then you would just need to take those rows out of your calculations for the actual bigger stripes, if that makes any sense. That's basically all there is to know about the back construction of the panel. I'll talk a little bit now about some other things that you could change, or some other things you could augment. In version 1 of the scarf, not only did I mirror this silver glittery stripe and another silver glittery stripe up here, in panel 1 I also did the same thing here, this silver and this silver in silver glitter. I didn't do that because I was really worried I was going to run out of silver glitter, and I didn't want to buy more. I knew that I wanted to put some in the tassels. I ended up having enough. So, hindsight 2020, I should have just done that. But that's certainly something to consider when you're thinking about the actual grams and the actual weights to the yarn that you want to be using. It's just a personal preference. I kind of like that they were a little bit different because it gives each side a different feel. But if you want kind of the idea of a silver bar motif more in your work, that's what I would do. Similarly, you could do the larger stripes in the silver glitter, but for me, I found that the silver glitter was a little bit rougher, and I wanted to keep those on the areas that wouldn't perhaps be on your naked neck. So those are all kind of things that you could change. And also in the made to measure aspect, which is why I said to watch the video all the way, you can obviously change a lot of different things. You can change the width of the stripes. You can change kind of how much space you have between the stripes and the start of the letters. You could change a lot of different things to give it a more made to measure kind of feeling. As what I said earlier, you just need to make sure that you keep the same amount of rows for panel 1 as panel 2. But in general, think of it more as kind of building blocks. I was trying to go for a kind of collegiate-esque sports team look. And I noticed a lot of these had varying levels, varying widths of stripes, often very thin stripes and then longer stripes, and then quite a bit of distance between the actual name. So that's the inspiration for this one, but obviously you can do whatever you want. For the tassel construction, in prototype number 1, I did 3-inch tassels, which meant that I was cutting about 6 inches of yarn, and then I took a crochet hook and I fed through in and I just tied them off. But in prototype number 2, I decided to do 8-inch. No, actually I did 5 inches. I like this one more. I was trying to do 8 inches, which was my next step, and I just realized when I put it next to it, it wasn't a really big difference. You see a lot more of a difference in the 5th one, and it does feel, I'm not sure yet. Obviously, Elle can just change however they want. They can just, trim this down or whatever. And I do like that flexibility in it. But I just wanted to mention that as well. Obviously, if your tassels are not as long, then you won't need as much yarn. In terms of the actual construction after both panels are done, I used a slip stitch with a crochet hook, and I just took the 2 right pieces of the panels and I put... This is kind of confusing. I put the 2 right pieces of the panels together. So I seamed them right sides facing, just along the sides. I left a little gap at the bottom, and then I turned everything inside out, and then I just finished up that seam. And I did block this time around with pins and on cardboard and everything. I honestly didn't see a huge difference. I think it's the way that I'm also seaming it. You're going to get quite a chunky seam in this sense if you do what I did, just because the slip stitch on the reverse side tends to leave sort of a raised edge on the other side, which you don't notice as much when it's folded. But it is another thing to consider. If you do a different type of seaming, then maybe you'll have a more seamless edge. But in general, the seam will be a little bit different for that one, for yours. Let's see, what else do you need to know? I think that's all that you need to know about if you want to actually construct this. If you do, please let me know. Please tag me. I'd love to see it. I've made this now twice. It is a labor of love. I'm not exactly sure if I could even stomach making a third one. I need a lot more of a break. But I do feel like there are certain things that I would want to change. For reference, from this scarf from prototype number 1, I did change greatly the size of the letters. So in prototype number 1, I think I only had 2 or 3 rows space on either side of the letters, but it just meant that with the seam, it ended up being like the letters were very prominent here. I will get that scarf and I will show it to you. So for reference, this is prototype number 1, and you can see that the letters are much larger, but it means that you can't see anything else basically here. And I felt like you were kind of losing out a little bit based on the other scarf, which I will show you the right way around, where you can see that you actually do see a little bit more of a border in between them, and I like that look a lot better. I will say though, as a fun little stories, I did construct half of this first panel of the scarf from size charts or from charts that had 33 rows. I don't know how I missed it. All of a sudden it just clicked and I was like, whoa, wait, something's wrong. So, I mean, there are a lot of things I would change if I was doing a third prototype. I would do more of the silver bars. I would, I've now done like 3 or 4 projects now with Intarsia, and I am getting a little bit better at it in terms of the tension. So yeah, I just wanted to make a video and go into more of the nitty gritties in case you wanted to actually make this scarf for yourself. You can join the Babel Scarf Community. If you have any ideas about what as well you would change, please let me know down below because I'm always intrigued about it. I also realized as I was holding up this scarf that there was an end in the inside that I was like, oh, I'm gonna fix this before I seam it, and I didn't fix it. So I think I'm actually going to have to cut a little hole in the side, or a bigger hole in the side, I guess, and then re-invert them, fix up those ends, and then re-seam those. That's fun. It's like my favorite parts of a project, having to do them all over again, which if you didn't catch is 100% sarcasm. I hate weaving in ends. I hate seaming these. If you've been following me for a while, in my monthly wrap-ups, I talk about how much I hate seaming. I hate weaving in ends. So yeah, anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this video. As I said before, if you manage to make the Babel scarves, please let me know. I would love to see them and love to see what you do differently for your versions. And I will see you in the next video, which will not be a crafting video. I feel like we've had a lot of crafting videos recently. I don't know if anyone is enjoying them, but we will be going back to a lot more bookish stuff and fewer crafting things. I do a lot of crafting in my life, but fewer crafting videos on this channel unless other people want to see them. Okay, have a really great rest of your reading day, week, month, and year, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.